So here it is, Merry Christmas, everybody's having
Hello!
Hello.
Hi, Miss Baxendale.
Hi, Miss Jeff.
How exciting. Now today we're going to read a story for all of the children in the junior school. And before we start our story, Miss Baxendale, I want to tell you something.
Okay.
It's something to do with the story because our story today is called Mrs. Pepperpot's Christmas. But do you know what a pepperpot is?
A Pepperpot? I'm not sure.
No, I was a little bit confused when I heard that word too. So then I thought, I think I've got a pepperpot at home. And I found 2 tiny little pepperpots. Actually, one is a pepperpot and one is for salt. And what you do is you use them to sprinkle pepper and salt on your food. But look, they're like our Wellingtons.
Oh, he'll like those.
Yeah, he will. We found some friends for Wellington. So this is very important, everybody, because I want you to look at the size of the pepperpot to know what happens to Mrs. Pepperpot, because she's a little bit like magic, Mrs. Pepperpot. So let's begin our story. We'll put our pepperpots down there. And as I said, it's called Mrs. Pepperpot's Christmas. Do you want to start, Miss Baxendale? Okay.
There once was a little old woman who went to bed at night like everyone else. But sometimes in the morning she would wake up and find that she had shrunk to the size of a pepperpot. As it happens, her name was Mrs. Pepperpot.
So she shrank to the size of one of those. That's very small. I wonder what you would do if you shrunk to that small. Let's find out what she does. This was one of those mornings, and Mrs. Pepperpot climbed to the top of the bedpost and swung her legs while she wondered what to do.
What a nuisance, she said, just when I wanted to go to the Christmas market with Mr. Pepperpot. She wanted to buy a sheaf of corn for the birds' Christmas dinner, and she wanted to get them in a little birdhouse where she could feed them every day.
Oh, how lovely.
The other thing she wanted was a wreath of mistletoe to hang over the door so that she could wish Mr. Pepperpot a happy Christmas with a kiss. But Mr. Pepperpot thought this was a silly idea. Quite unnecessary, he said.
That's not very fun, is it? Dearie me. Shall I read this page? We've got a cat. But Mrs. Pepperpot was very clever at getting her own way. So even though she was now no bigger than a mouse, she soon worked out a plan. She heard her husband put her knapsack down on the floor in the kitchen and, quick as a flash, she slid down the bedpost, scuttled over the doorstep and climbed into one of the knapsack pockets. I wonder where she's going to go.
Mr. Pepperpot put the knapsack on his back and set off through the snow on his kick sledge, while Mrs. Pepperpot peeped out of his pocket.
Look at all those nice cottages, she said to herself. I bet every one of them has a sheaf of corn and a little house for the birds. And they'll have mistletoe over the door as well, no doubt. But you wait till I get home. I'll show them. I think she's got a plan.
I wonder what it is.
I wonder.
At the market, there were crowds of people, both big and small. Everyone was doing their Christmas shopping, and there was plenty to choose from. At one stall stood a farmer selling beautiful golden sheaves of corn. As her husband walked past the stall, Miss Pepperpot climbed out from the knapsack pocket and disappeared into the biggest sheaf of all.
I think she's rather cheeky, Mrs. Pepperpot. Hello, Mr. Pepperpot, said the farmer. How about some corn for the birds this Christmas? Too dear, answered Mr. Pepperpot gruffly. He's not very happy, is he? He's not got too expensive, and he's not got in the Christmas spirit at all.
"Oh, no, it's not," squeaked the little voice of Mrs. Pepperpot. "If you don't buy this sheaf of corn, I'll tell everyone you're married to the woman who shrinks."
I don't think he wants that to happen. Now, Mr. Pepperpot hated people to know about his wife turning small. So when he saw her waving to him from the biggest sheaf, he said to the farmer, "I've changed my mind. I'll have that one, please." But the farmer told him that he would have to wait in the queue. Of course, he's got to be patient.
Only a little girl saw Mrs. Pepperpot slip out of the corn and dash into a birdhouse on Mr. Anderson's stall. He was a carpenter and made all his birdhouses look just like real houses with doors and windows for the birds to fly in and out. Of course, Mrs. Pepperpot chose the prettiest house. It even had curtains in the windows, and from behind these she watched her husband buy the very best sheaf of corn and stuff it in his knapsack.
I wonder what her plan is now. He thought his wife was safe inside and was just about to get on his kick sledge and head for home when he heard a little voice calling him from the next stall. What is she going to do now? Let's find out.
"Hello, husband," squeaked Mrs. Pepperpot. "Haven't you forgotten something? You were going to buy me a birdhouse." Mr. Pepperpot hurried over to the stall. He pointed to the house with the curtains and said, "I want to buy that one, please." Mr. Anderson was busy with his customers. "You'll have to take your turn," he said.
So once more, poor Mr. Pepperpot had to stand patiently in a queue. He hoped that no one else would buy the house with his wife inside. But guess what, Miss Baxendale? She wasn't inside. She had run out of the back door and now she was on her way to the next stall.
She's very speedy.
She's very speedy and she's quite cheeky. She likes to get her own way.
Here there was a pretty young lady selling holly and mistletoe. Mrs. Pepperpot had to climb up the post to reach the nicest wreath, and there she stayed hidden. Soon Mr. Pepperpot came by, carrying both the sheaf of corn and the little birdhouse. The young lady gave him a dazzling smile and said, "Oh, Mr. Pepperpot, wouldn't you like to buy a wreath of mistletoe for your wife?" "No thanks," said Mr. Pepperpot. "I'm in a hurry."
I think he is in a hurry, but I wonder what Mrs. Pepperpot is going to do to make sure she gets the wreath. Do you want to read the next page, Miss Baxendale?
"Swing high, swing low, I'm in the mistletoe," sang Mrs. Pepperpot from her lofty perch. When Mr. Pepperpot caught sight of her, his mouth fell open. "Oh dear," he groaned, "this is too bad."
It is too bad. I'm wondering, do we have a wreath around?
We have a very unnatural wreath.
Oh, here is an unnatural wreath. I like the one here better, but we've still got the red bow like that one. So let's find out how Mrs. Pepperpot gets this wreath. With a shaking hand, he paid the young lady the right money and lifted the wreath down himself, taking care that Mrs. Pepperpot didn't slip out of his fingers. This time, there would be no escape. He would take his wife straight home, whether she liked it or not. Very sensible. Stop her being so cheeky. But something happens.
Oh dear. But just as he was leaving, the young lady said, "Oh, sir, you're our 100th customer, so you get a free balloon." And she handed him a red balloon.
Very beautiful.
Before anyone could say Jack Robinson, Mrs. Pepperpot had grabbed the string, and while Mr. Pepperpot was struggling with his purse, gloves and parcels, his tiny wife was soaring up into the sky.
She's going up. I wonder who she's going to meet up there. Do you want to read this?
Up she went over the marketplace, and soon she was fluttering over the trees of the forest, followed by a crowd of crows and magpies and small birds of every sort.
"Here I come," she shouted in bird language. For when Mrs. Pepperpot was small, she could talk with animals and birds. That's pretty cool. A big crow cawed, "Are you going to the moon with that balloon?" I wonder if that's where she wants to go.
"Not quite, I hope," said Mrs. Pepperpot as she told them the whole story. The birds all squawked with glee when they heard about the corn and the birdhouse she had got for them. "But first you must help me," said Mrs. Pepperpot. "I want you all to hang on to this balloon string and guide me back to the land on my own doorstep." So the birds clung to the string with their beaks and claws, and as they flew down to Miss Pepperpot's house, the balloon looked like a kite with fancy bows tied to its tail.
Looks very beautiful. I'd love a balloon with all those birds. When Mrs. Pepperpot set foot on the ground, she instantly grew to her normal size. So she waved goodbye to the birds and she went indoors to wait for Mr. Pepperpot. Do you think Mr. Pepperpot knows where she's gone?
I'm not sure. I think he was probably be quite stressed.
I think he's a little bit worried. She is a cheeky, cheeky wife, Mrs. Pepperpot.
It was late in the evening before Mr. Pepperpot came home, tired and miserable after searching everywhere for his lost wife.
I'm not surprised. He put his knapsack down in the hall and carried the sheaf of corn and the birdhouse outside. But when he came in again, he noticed that the mistletoe had disappeared. "Oh, well," he said sadly, "what does it matter now that Mrs. Pepperpot is gone?" But is she really gone? Let's find out. Last page of the story.
He opened the door into the kitchen, and there was the mistletoe hanging over the doorway, and under it, as large as life, stood Mrs. Pepperpot. "Darling husband," she said, and she put her arms round his neck and gave him a great big smacking kiss. Happy Christmas.
Oh,
Phew.
few indeed. I was slightly worried when Mrs. Pepperpot went up in that balloon. How was she ever going to get home? But she was cheeky, but she was also very clever.
She was very clever. It was quite an adventure.
She really did. Anyway, everybody, that is the end of our story. And we
Merry
hope you enjoyed
Christmas,
it.
everyone.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.